Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a Byline Times article which suggests the BBC have identified trust issues with Reform UK voters, and so in order to win them over are looking at a programme of content. Now, the potential on drama output is perhaps more subjective, but changing news output would seem very dodgy indeed. Let's discuss it. But first, for daily news and politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So Byline Times reporting that the BBC are looking at changing both drama and news output in order to win over Reform UK supporters. Now, adapting your content to suit the audience is fine by me. And there are a lot of Reform supporters and they should be included. But are we talking about just producing content which fits with their priorities, which is really just about giving the content people want? Or are we talking about producing content which panders to a worldview which is factually incorrect? Because if it's the latter, and I'm reading that there's a heavy implication that it's the latter, then we have a problem. The BBC are not out and out corrupt, right? They're not trying to be politically biased in the same way as, say, the Daily Telegraph or GB News. But it nonetheless fails, for whatever reason, to inform the public. Like, how many times does it need saying? If one person says that it's raining and one person says that it's not, it is not for a journalist to report both statements. It's their job to stick their head out of the window and verify the correct statement. It is the job of the news to inform. You can have commentary, which strays into opinion. That should be separate. That's where the balancing act is potentially tricky for a public service like the BBC. But reporting the news is just reporting the facts, and it should not be as complicated or as convoluted as the BBC make it. And there are extra challenges for news reporters these days. You know, the news comes at us so immediately. Outlets have to be reporting on major stories as they happen because they're going around social media anyway. So to stay relevant, of course, they've got to report on something as it's happening. But then how do you do that in a way which means you are at low risk of reporting false facts in your rush? Now, just to be clear, nothing in the Byline Times article says that the BBC will pander to the Farage worldview as such. Selecting news stories which are designed to appeal to an audience is not in itself a huge problem. If you want clicks, you need to discuss the issues which your audience is interested in. However, if we combine a story selection with Reform UK supporters in mind, where the reporting itself also has in mind the proposed aim, to win back the trust of Reform supporters, and you combine that with the consistent failure of the BBC to tackle, say, false equivalence and other forms of unintentional bias, it's no wonder the article cites unnamed insiders as having concerns. For example, the BBC's Brexit coverage was famously dreadful. It didn't inform the public on key issues, like it didn't bother to explain to the public what the single market is or how Brexit would impact the Good Friday Agreement and so on. And then they would present two people for debates, one warning of the economic damage Brexit would cause, the other talking of the potential benefits, and they called that balance. And because there was one of each, people watching it would think, oh, opinions divided, it's roughly split 50-50. No, what happened, as was highlighted years later by the likes of Emily Maitlis, was the BBC would try and get an economist to present both sides, and they'd ring up and within a few minutes they'd get an economist who will warn about the damage that Brexit will absolutely do. Then they would spend hours trying to find an economist for the counter view because there were almost nobody willing to do it. The problem with the BBC is they think everything is a matter of opinion, so they have to present both sides. No, some things are just facts. Perhaps they need more people with science degrees running the operation and fewer people with literature degrees. We might get a bit more fact and a bit less flowery fiction then. Probably get better pyrotechnics as well, because we scientists love a good explosion. Controlled, of course. But the absolutely killer line for me was when Adam Bienkov, the journalist, with the article, said he's pushing it on social media, and he said he'd approached the BBC to ask them to provide examples of when they'd ever done this for supporters of other parties. And they said they couldn't give any examples. Oh. So when the BBC said in their defence that their charter requires them to reflect and represent all communities in the UK, I get that. Yeah, absolutely. Of course they should. And that will mean reflecting and representing parts of our community that I, very strongly disagree with. But if they have never carried out this exercise for supporters of other political parties, but are now doing so exclusively for Reform supporters, then by their own admission, they're not complying with the Charter. Indeed, the complete lack of coverage of, say, the Lib Dems, who have way greater representation in Parliament, or the Green Party, which is almost the same as Reform UK, means that I might reasonably ask why they're failing by their own standards. Also, targeting people for special treatment based on their party political support. Is that really the way to do it? See, Reform UK supporters are quite diverse in a lot of ways, just as supporters of other major parties are. The party is known for being extremely anti-immigration, right? But a large number of their supporters are not actually that extreme in their views. Like Reform UK say, zero net migration. Actually, most of their supporters don't think we need that. A decent chunk even think immigration is fine as it is now. The party is very anti-climate action. Yeah, actually, we know from polling as well that most Reform UK supporters are in favour of climate action and net zero. Like, many people support Reform UK because of the belief they need a new party to shake politics up, not for any individual policy. It's the same with people voting for any party. You know, you might approve of a whole load of their policies and disapprove of a whole load of others. You're just choosing which one you think is the best fit. So what will the BBC really be doing? Appealing to Reform UK supporters, or appealing to an archetype of a Reform UK supporter, a caricature? I have no objection to the BBC being mindful of the issues that perhaps sections of British society are increasingly interested in. But they have a choice. They can either, with both their dramas and news, inform, or they can misinform. It doesn't matter whether they do it deliberately or not. It's one or the other. You know, they were responsible for an awful lot of misinformation over Brexit. It may not have been deliberate on their part, but they contributed to a lot of the divisions in society because of their refusal to state facts as facts and then worry about balanced opinion content. Put it this way, their track record does not inspire confidence in me. Although I will end with my usual comment, because I can predict what some people will be saying when the BBC are messing things up. Would only make things worse to get rid of it. The far right have been bending the BBC to their will for many years by a combination of bullying and also the Tories putting some of their people into key positions. But they would rather it was gone completely. They cannot control it completely as they would like, because it still tries to be balanced. It tries to be at least be balanced. They don't want an outlet that even tries to be balanced, even if it does it badly. If it was sold off, then they could. Think of GB News and the BBC as a bit like Truth Social and Twitter. Truth Social was an attempt at a start-up social media platform to promote far-right views, right? Particularly Trumpism. But it didn't work because most ordinary people weren't going to go to Truth Social knowing what it was. So Musk bought the established platform, Twitter, which already had that audience, that spread audience that represented a chunk of society. And now it's a complete cesspit. Same will happen with the BBC. If you allow it to be privatised, because that's what defunding it means. Remember, at the moment, it's nationalised. So you're talking about privatising it. It's not going to be bought by anyone who wants to report the facts. Quite the reverse. It'll be bought by someone who wants a propaganda tool with pre-existing credibility, just as Musk did with Twitter. You know, the BBC needs saving, not destroying. It needs reform, just not Reform UK. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even become a member for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.